Coming to you from the Spit Studios in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, this is the Spit Sports Show. I don't know if I'm going to keep that intro or not. That wasn't quite as funny as I thought it would be when I rehearsed it. You know that Sidney Crosby commercial where it like bookends with him saying, "Four nations facing off," and he just has no aura. Anyways, welcome everybody to the show. I am so freaking excited for an international hockey competition. The last time this happened in 2016 at the World Cup of Hockey, genuinely, it was some of the most fun I've ever had watching a sporting competition, period. I don't know how they didn't have Team North America back in it this year because to me, they were really the lifeblood of that tournament in 2016, watching all of these young kids just play free and fast, which is just so different from the traditional NHL system nowadays. I loved it in 2016. I'm looking forward to it now, even with North America not being in it, because we get to see Crosby, McDavid, McKinnon on the same team. We get to see Matthews and Matthew Tkachuk on the same roster. Matthews and Eichel is going to be awesome. Team Sweden looks like they're going to be really good, but I want to do a full preview because, as I mentioned before, as kind of a preamble, when I was discussing the World Juniors and where I thought Hockey Canada was at, I was pretty down on Canada's roster for the Four Nations. Not in the general sense of how you would be down on a team, but down on them in the context of Canada is the favorites prohibitively in pretty much every hockey tournament they've entered for the past, I don't know, 40 years since the Soviet Union collapsed. So looking at it from that lens, I didn't really love the way the roster was panning out. Obviously, I thought goaltending was an issue. I thought the back end of the defense core could be a problem. But listen, call me Canadian, call me a biased fan, call me a homer. When I saw these videos of McKinnon, McDavid, and Makar on the ice together with Sidney Crosby as the orchestrator, like I couldn't help but get these tingly feelings in my bones that Canada was just going to pull up to this tournament and rock these teams because the top end talent is just so high in terms of its peak and what it can do that it really gave me this jolt feeling of bet the house on Canada, take out a mortgage. They're taking down the rest of the world because this is their tournament. But I didn't do that because I wanted to do some research and actually look into if those feelings were legitimate. Because the analysis for this tournament is not as hard as it is for the NHL playoffs or the NFL playoffs or anything I've ever done. Because really, again, there's four nations facing off. Anyway, I think that's so funny. But there's only four teams, it's really not that difficult to go piece by piece, roster against roster, to see who you think should be the on paper favorite going into a tournament like this. And it makes it even easier when it really feels like a three nations face off. Because I mean, no disrespect at all to Team Finland. I think they are the fourth best hockey nation on earth and they deserve a spot here. But they are clearly a step below the rest of these teams in terms of talent. Now, their forwards, I think, are actually going to be able to compete. Arturi Lehkonen, Alexander Barkov, Mikko Rantanen, Mikael Granlund, Aho, like these are all really, really solid players who not only are really good on the offensive side of the puck, pretty much all of those guys I just mentioned are just as conscious of their defensive play as they are of their offensive play, which I think is going to be huge in a tournament like this, where I can imagine when these games get tight, it's going to be really good to have as many two-way forwards on the ice as you possibly can. But their back end is just flatly brutal, and I have no idea how a top pairing of Esa Lindell and Miro Heiskanen is going to be able to keep up with the Matthewses and the Eichels and the McDavids of the world. I just don't see it happening. And it's not like they have incredible depth either, where their first line is the same as their third line. Nico Makola, pardon me if I'm mispronouncing that name. I don't hear his name on TV a lot. And Yanni Hakanpää. Like, those guys they're good, but in terms of this Four Nations face-off, they're clearly not on that talent level. Again, no disrespect, but I have to say what I see. That's just the analysis. I think Kevin Lankinen needs to be even better for Finland than he's been with the Canucks over the past, well, to be honest, 4 months since the season started. He's been unbelievable, but it doesn't even look like he's going to get the start because UC Soros is obviously the much more established goaltender. He's the guy who Finland thought they were going to rely on coming into this tournament when it first got announced, probably. So I don't even know if he's going to be in the tournament that often. And I think he's going to have to steal a game or two if Finland wants a chance. Now, um, I still think it's dumb that Russia isn't involved in the Four Nations. That's a whole other thing. I think they should have taken Finland and Russia's rosters and just combined them. I know that doesn't work politically because Finland and Russia have obviously a big history of not getting along with one another. And I don't think that relationship is much better today. I'm not totally up to date on my political sciences, but I don't think they're great. But I think if you took those two rosters and combined them, that would have been really interesting. But as it sits, I think Finland's a clear last place. No, again, no offense to Finland. I think you guys are amazing for how little people you have, how freaking great you are at hockey. But to me, this is the three nations face off. And one of the teams who I have the utmost respect for is Sweden because I do think they have a chance to win this tournament. Because not only do they have a lot of veterans and a lot of guys who have been in situations like this, Stanley Cup finalists, Stanley Cup winners. You've got guys like Chris Letang who have been there for just, you know, decades. They're able to help out with the young guys, Hedman, who's obviously won cups. Sorry, Eric Carlson. My apologies. William Nylander is obviously a great scorer. I think Team Sweden's defense is actually could be the very best in the tournament when you just look at the core of their back end. Like I just mentioned, Victor Hedman with Brodin and Matthias Ekholm with Eric Carlson and Rasmus Dahlin on your third defensive pairing is just nasty. And once I look at their forward core, like Nylander, Zabinajad, Raquel, Zabinajad and Raquel are awesome two-way. Obviously, you got Nylander for the offense. This is all just projected lines, by the way. And then second line, Adrian Kempe, Elias Pettersson, and Philip Forsberg. Like, that line is going to be able to put in some goals. So if you look at this team, it's like they're constructed to really make a deep playoff run. They got veterans. I think they've got really good depth, and their back end is their strength. But them winning the tournament completely, the reason it would really surprise me if they were able to pull off the gold here is because even though their forward core is really good and solid, the lack of star power that it has compared to these other two teams, I think is just a little bit too much to overcome. So when I just look at Sweden's projected top six, and this is courtesy of Daily Faceoff, you got Nylander, Zabinajad, Raquel, Kempe, Pettersson, Forsberg, like I just mentioned. On paper, that's a heck of a top six. And obviously, if this was the NHL, that is the best top six in hockey, likely. But that top six so far this season has 273 points combined. Canada's top six, or their projected top six, has 408 points combined. So they're not quite doubling them up, but they're getting close. And again, that's only six players. If you take in the other six, that gap just widens even more. And by the way, the US has 359 points combined to Sweden's 273. So could Sweden win the tournament? I have no doubt about that. They could absolutely go on a run with this veteran squad, develop some sick chemistry, shut teams down. And by the way, I think they have the biggest advantage in net coming into this with Jacob Markstrom. It's him or Hellebuck, but obviously they have a big advantage over Canada in net, I think. So they could surprise some teams, but they're going to have to win by playing a shutdown style. And I just don't think Canada or US's offensive talent is really shut downable, if that makes enough sense. So that brings me to where you guys probably thought this was going, which is US and Canada are, in my opinion, pretty clearly the two best teams in this tournament. And the thing that's so interesting about these two teams and comparing their rosters is if you really look at it and look at it from a broad scope, it's not that much dissimilar to what we just saw in the Super Bowl. And here's what I mean by that. So, Canada, if you look at their top of the top end talent, I don't think the US is quite in that league. I'm talking McDavid, McKinnon, McCarr, like the top of the top. They probably have undisputedly three of the five best players in the world on that team. Whereas you look at the US, not saying Canada doesn't have depth, but if you look at lines 1 to 4 and forward and 1 to 3 on defense, you could argue USA's fourth line is just as good as their second line, which you can't say for Canada. And what I mean by that in terms of the Super Bowl comparison is you had Kansas City with the high end talent of Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelsey, the superstars of superstars. And they were going against the Eagles, who had the better overall roster, but were missing, that real high end piece. So that's kind of how I see this playing out. Now, do I see these games playing out the way the Super Bowl did with the team with the overall better roster just whooping on the high end talent? I don't, because Connor McDavid is clearly by a mile the best player in the world. Nathan McKinnon's not far behind him, and I really do think that those two guys' refuse to lose is going to be enough. But add on to that a Stanley Cup champion in Sam Reinhart, obviously Mark Stone, who's won a cup, to fill out that top six with, the greatest hockey player of this generation, Sidney Crosby. And the thing that Canada's done really well is their depth lines, even though they're not comparable to the US's in terms of their scoring ability. Like Braden Point, Brad Marchand, and Seth Jarvis as a third line, that is the most scrappy, could score, shut you down, piss you off third line that you could possibly imagine for any team in the Four Nations Faceoff. And I think Hagel, Sorelli, and Bennett is kind of an ideal fourth line as well. Again, that's what you want in a fourth line, that scrappiness. Now, where they kind of fall short is on their defensive end. Losing Alex Pietrangelo is not great because I don't think Drew Doughty is very good anymore. But you still have Makar and Devin Taves, who are going to hog most of those minutes. And obviously Morrissey and Parenko play together all the time, which brings me to goaltending. This is where the U.S. has just a distinct advantage. I don't believe in Aiden Hill currently. I think goalies can get streaky, though. And if he manages to get hot during this tournament, obviously Canada's going to be even more of the favorite. But Jacob Markstrom's been the best goalie in the NHL this season. He's been playing unbelievable in every single regular season he's had in the past 3 years. But that is a big question mark because in the biggest of spots, Hellebuck is well known these days to be a guy who can get a little tight. During the playoffs, during big Jets games, it doesn't seem like he's exactly the same goalie. And obviously, even though this is technically an exhibition tournament and there's nothing really on the line, the national pride here is huge, especially because hockey players aren't really doing the Olympics anymore. This is their chance to show out for their country. So there is going to be some pressure. Now, his backup, Jake Ottinger, is obviously very solid as well. So the U.S. has a great backup plan. But even though I think Ottinger is better than Aiden Hill, I don't think that gap is nearly as big as it is between Hellebuck and Hill when they're both playing at their average, in my opinion. So these two rosters are incredibly similar. To be honest, it's probably going to come down to which goalie gets hot and who's able to keep the puck out of the net better. I would bet that Canada gets that last goal, that big play in the gold medal game that ends up taking them over the top. But I think any of the US or Sweden could absolutely win it. I think the US, if I were to have a title pie of who I think is going to win the tournament, I think Canada would have about a 60% slice. The US would have, I don't know, 25%. No, that's too much. Canada with a 50% slice. I'm doing this. USA with a 30%. Sweden with 15, and Finland with like 5. That's about where I'd have it. So let me know what you guys think. Let me know if you guys are excited at all for the Four Nations tourney in the comments below. As always, I love reading comments. I love talking about sports, and I'm small enough as to where I can respond to all comments. So leave some in the comment section below. Please leave a like if you enjoyed what you heard. Please subscribe if you really enjoyed the Spit Sports Show. Just hit over 400 subscribers. No big deal. Thank you all so much, as always. And I'll see you all in the next one. Peace. I love you guys.